Out here, at the very edge of the Western world, it's easy to imagine yourself Robinson Crusoe, alone, just the soaring eagles and barking sea lions for company. These are the Broken Islands, a spray of glittering gems at the mouth of Barkley Sound on the west coast of British Columbia's Vancouver Island. And they are a paddler's paradise. It is quite impossible to explore these islands without feeling a very real connection to the past. There are few places left in the entire world at once accessible and virtually unchanged for millennia. In the Broken Islands, a visitor can explore a region that is the same as it was thousands of years before the first white man sailed into its sheltered harbors. As the islands remain unchanged, so too does the main method of travel here, canoe and kayak. To be sure, fiberglass, Kevlar, and plastic have replaced the hand-hewn cedar dugouts, and sealskin and cedar bark have given way to a rainbow of Gore-Tex. But there the differences end. Broken Island visitors paddle through the fog into the past to get a glimpse of a land and culture born of wind and sea, a land that progress forgot. The Broken Group Islands number more than 100 and range from tiny islets, little more than craggy reefs, to a few that are several hectares in size. The myriad coves and inlets of the inner islands provide a unique experience for visitors. Few paddling destinations in the world offer such beauty and serenity. These waters are like quiet ponds, safe enough for even novice paddlers. But the main channels and the waters of the outer islands are washed by the open Pacific, a misnomer if ever there was one. Paddlers exploring the outer islands ride oceanic swells born far out in the ocean, testing even the most seasoned trippers. This is about as far west as you can get in Canada. From here, not so much as a pebble breaks the surface, all the way to Japan. The broken islands sit like scattered jewels at the entrance to Barkley Sound, the long inlet that almost severs the lower third of Vancouver Island from the rest. The only towns in this area are the fishing villages of Bamfield in the south and Ucluelet in the north. Still further north is Tofino. The 100 square kilometer Broken Group is part of Pacific Rim National Park, including Long Beach and the rugged West Coast Trail. Long Beach is 81 square kilometers with 30 kilometers of shoreline. The West Coast Trail, once a route to civilization for shipwrecked sailors, is a challenging 72-kilometer wilderness hike. The three park units encompass 233 square kilometers of ocean, making the entire park area 513 square kilometers. The Broken Group was added to the park in the early 1970s, and while the move ensured its preservation, it also increased the area's popularity. This is not wilderness tripping by any stretch. Every year from May to September, more than 12,000 canoeists and kayakers, along with countless powerboaters, yachtsmen, and sports fishermen meet here. There are nights in the peak season when it's difficult to find a campsite among the cheek-by-jowl tents on many of the islands. As a national park, visitors are permitted to make camp only in designated sites. Don't make the mistake of trying to camp in non-designated areas. The park's wardens are empowered to lay charges and levy fines. The number of Broken Group visitors has grown exponentially in recent years. Parks officials have had to implement user fees and a reservation system which will both take effect in the 1995 season. For all its high peak season traffic, the Broken Group still offers solitude and serenity. Once away from camp, you can paddle all day without seeing another soul. With 100 or so square kilometers to explore, it's easy to disappear for an entire day to experience the islands as Captain Charles William Barkley did more than 200 years ago. Barkley, in command of the British trading vessel Loudon, or Imperial Eagle as it was eventually to be known, arrived here in June of 1787. With Barkley came his 17-year-old wife, Frances Hornby Trevor, whom he had married in England the previous year. The young Mrs. Barkley was the first European woman to see the northwest coast of North America. Like most 18th century explorers, Barkley came here to trade with the Indians and harvest the lush sea otter pelts so highly prized throughout Europe. In the late 18th century, a prime sea otter pelt sold for up to $4,000 on the London fur market. An ambitious captain could return home with millions of dollars worth of pelts in his holds. The British, American, Russian, and Spanish hunt decimated the sea otter population within a few decades. By the mid-1800s, they had virtually exterminated the sea otter. Now, 2 centuries later, the sea otter is just beginning to reestablish itself on the coast as a result of federal and provincial restoration efforts. The Sound and its myriad islands still bear reminders of the Barkleys' visit and those who followed. The main channels, Loudon and Imperial Eagle, were named for his ship, Trevor Channel for his wife. Most of the islands were named almost a century later by Captain G.H. Richards, who charted these waters in 1859. When Barkley arrived, he met the Nuchalmouth Indians, to whom the Broken Islands have been home for thousands of years. Archaeologists estimate that as many as 10,000 natives once inhabited the sound. But in April of 1862, a white man from San Francisco arrived in Victoria. With him came smallpox. The disease quickly spread to the many Indians who camped on the outskirts of Victoria. Concerned authorities burned their camps and evicted them. When the Indians went home, they took the disease with them. Thousands of Indians, indeed 1/3 of the province's native population, died in the 3 years it took the disease to run its course. Today, just 4 Indian reserves remain in the broken group, on Effingham, Keith, and Nettle Islands. These reserves are private property and should be respected as such. Here and there throughout the broken group, more than 100 culturally significant sites still remind visitors of the complex society the Nuchalnath people evolved. The Nuchalnath were a prosperous people who lived well on the abundant food supply provided by the sea. They fished, harvested shellfish, and hunted seals and whales from their fast and stable dugout canoes. The remnants of middens, canoe runs, and fish traps are still evident if you keep your eyes open. Middens are small hills made up of the shells of millions of harvested shellfish. Nuchalnath women would come to these sites to shuck their baskets of clams and mussels. Here and there, you're likely to come across an oddly geometric array of rocks that are clearly not natural in their arrangement. These are the stone wall fish traps built by the Nuchalnath. Archaeologists believe that natives would drive schools of herring and anchovies into the traps, then wait for a tide change to strand them so they could be harvested at leisure. The natural forces which shaped this region began their work hundreds of millions of years ago with a volcanic crumpling and squeezing that sculpted what would become the coastline of British Columbia. Over millions of years, sediment and lava from submarine volcanoes built up the mountains of Vancouver Island. Over many more millions of years, they were eroded away, reformed, eroded, and rebuilt again. The Pacific coast was covered by ocean water many times during those millions of years, but not until 25 million years ago did the present coastline finally emerge. 4 times during the past million years, more than a quarter of the planet was locked in creeping, grinding ice up to 2 miles thick. It was the ice that carved the region into the physical features we know today. About 11,000 years ago, the climate warmed, ending the 100,000-year Vachon glaciation period on coastal British Columbia. By 10,000 years ago, the vast ice sheets had receded, revealing this remarkably sculpted terrain. The sea followed the receding ice into the deep fjords the glaciers had carved, creating this paddler's paradise. several ways to get to the Broken Islands. Some will cross Imperial Eagle Channel from Bamfield. From the entrance to Bamfield Inlet, it's a 2-kilometer paddle across Trevor Channel to the Deer Group Islands. Then another 9 kilometers of open water into the Broken Group. These channels are extremely dangerous for the ill-prepared and inexperienced. Oceanic swells and strong wind make the crossing extremely hazardous, even for expert sea kayakers. Many visitors put in at Tocourt Bay on the northwest side of Barkley Sound, paddle through the Stopper Islands, and if the wind is right, round Lyle Point and run across to Hand Island to the designated campsite. Still others have their boats and gear brought in by charter. Bill Petch of Kildonan Lodge is one of several Barkley Sound residents who run charter services. But the easiest and most pleasurable way into the Broken Group is on board the Lady Rose, or her sister ship, the Francis Barkley. In Port Alberni, gear and boats are loaded into the ship's hold. Broken Group visitors can enjoy a home-cooked breakfast with steaming 3 hours and 60 kilometers down Alberni Inlet, across Imperial Eagle and Seychart channels, to the former Seychart whaling station. Here, gear, boats, and paddlers are offloaded onto a small float with astonishing military-like precision. The Lady Rose has been making the run from Port Alberni for 50 years, servicing the resorts, fish farming, and logging operations along the inlet. Ship operators Alberni Marine Transport have plans to build a lodge for area visitors. Paddlers will disembark at Seychart, pick up any gear they chose to rent from Alberni Marine, and paddle across Seychart Channel into the Broken Group.
I'd like to welcome you to Pacific Rim National Park.
Paddlers who have arrived on the Lady Rose are met by one or other of the National Parks wardens who police the Broken Group. Following an informative 5 or 10 minute orientation of do's, don'ts, and useful tips, paddlers stow their gear and head out to explore the islands. Broken Group visitors, whether canoeists or kayakers, have one luxury that few other paddling destinations offer. Because there are no backbreaking portages out here, paddlers can carry as much gear as they can safely fit into their boats. Visitors in large capacity open canoes leave their compact backpacking gear at home and opt instead for full-size comfort. It's quite common out here to see paddlers enjoying full-course meals prepared over 2, 3, or even 4 burner camp stoves. Even the large family-sized tent you'd expect to see in crowded urban area campgrounds are common out here. Such is the luxury of a portageless paddling circuit. But there is some gear that is absolutely indispensable out here, the least of which is not an adequate supply of fresh water. Here and there throughout the islands there are trickles of barely palatable brackish water, but park wardens recommend bringing your own. At least 3 liters per person per day is the recommended daily amount. The other indispensable part of a broken group paddler's kit is rain gear. Not the cheap plastic discount department store variety that splits and tears under the slightest stress, but rather the high-quality clothing designed to keep its occupant warm and dry in even the harshest conditions. Paddlers traveling the islands in open canoes might want to consider installing spray decks too. Good quality waterproof packs are also a good idea. Precipitation maps show that this area gets something over 104 inches a year, but on-site sampling puts it as high as 290 inches a year. The climatic conditions that affect Barkley Sound begin 4,000 miles away in the equatorial mid-Pacific. Warm surface water is pushed westward by the North Equatorial Current. At the Philippine Islands, the current turns north, becoming the Kuroshio, or Japanese current. The lay of the Japanese landscape and prevailing westerlies turn it eastward, where it becomes the North Pacific Drift and move back towards North America. After traveling thousands of miles, these saturated air masses are pushed against the west coast by prevailing westerlies. Mountains deflect the airflow upwards where it cools at higher altitude, reducing its water-holding capacity. The excess water vapor condenses and is returned to Earth as snow or rain. This is not a place to be caught with anything less than first-rate equipment. Good quality compasses and the ability to use them are essential for broken group paddlers. It's an easy task to plan your route on a chart. It's quite another thing to try to orient yourself on a pea-soup day. At water level, one island looks very much like the rest in the fog. When the fog rolls in, it can sit like a skein of sopping gray wool for days. In the summer, it usually burns off in the afternoon, coincidentally about the same time the wind picks up. The fog is usually worst in late summer and early fall when warm, moist Pacific air condenses as it travels over cooler coastal water. When heavy fog disappears with a changing wind, it is usually indicating a change in weather and frequently forewarns of approaching storms. Parks officials recommend carrying a minimum of 3 emergency flares as well as a licensed VHF radio. Cellular phones don't work out here. There are as many ways to explore the broken group as there are paddlers, but one way in particular seems the safest and most time and energy efficient. An examination of the broken group chart reveals that the islands appear to be clustered into several separate groups. Each group has at least one campsite, providing a good base to explore the other islands in that cluster. Most visitors discover that, weather permitting, it's a good idea to begin a trip by paddling to the furthest destination on the first day, then leisurely working your way back to home base over the next several days. The weather out here is subject to sudden and violent changes. It makes good sense to be close to your home base on your last day or so in the islands, rather than risk being caught in a storm still hours away from your rendezvous with the Lady Rose, time and food running short. Out here, you must learn to live with the rhythms of wind and sea. Paddlers who push their luck and skills are asking for trouble. 2 paddlers have drowned out here since 1981. The Gibraltar Island campsite is a good base to spend a day or so poking around Nettle, Credo, Jarvis, Jacques, Reeks, Dempster, Mullins, Onion, and Weeb Islands. The campsite on Gilbert makes a good base for touring Effingham, Cooper, Wower, and the many other islands in this group. Across Coaster Channel, explore Clark and Benson from campsites on either island. from a campsite on Turret, Tour Nantes, Tricket, and Lovett. The Willis Island campsite lets you explore Dodd, Turtle, and several smaller islands. And north of Dodd, across Peacock Channel, are the Brabant Islands and Hand Island. The campsite on Hand is usually the first stopping point for paddlers coming in from Tocourt Bay. The wildlife that inhabits the Broken Group is diverse and sometimes even surprising. Mink, bear, deer, even wolves and mountain lions have been seen here. But far more common out here are mink and otter. Be advised, though, the otter you're likely to encounter are probably not the sea otters which were hunted to near extinction over the past 200 years, but rather its cousin, the river otter. Among the birds that inhabit this area are black oyster catchers, cormorants, and the magnificent bald eagle. One of the greatest concentrations of eagles on the entire Pacific coast is right here in these islands. Cormorants usually rest in mid-May in the Broken Group in sea caves or on cliffs. Paddlers are encouraged to leave cormorants alone during nesting season. By far the most common and obnoxious bird in the Broken Group is the northwestern crow. These fearless, swaggering birds can become real pests around the campsite and are quite adept at opening almost any type of unattended food container. You can almost count on being roused early every morning by the raucous calling and clucking of these big black crows. Barkley Sound is said to have some of the best salmon fishing in the world for coho and chinook. Both species are highly prized by anglers, which explains the scores of sports fishing boaters who come here during peak run times. Sports fishermen are not the only ones here after salmon. With the huge fish runs come seals, sea lions, and killer whales. Killer whales, though seen here only occasionally, do frequent these waters. It's a real thrill to come across a pod of these animals. There's never been a report of these intelligent and magnificent creatures bullying paddlers, but caution and some common sense should still be exercised. Harbor seals and sea lions are common in the Broken Group. There's usually a large colony on Wauer Island. From time to time in May or early June, fortunate paddlers can catch a glimpse of a pod of gray whales, some of the 17,000 grays which annually migrate past this area. While the more obvious birds, mammals, and fish are interesting to encounter here, by far the most fascinating wildlife in the Broken Group is that which lies beneath your boat. In the tide pools and quiet shallows, a universe of strange and beautiful creatures of almost incalculable diversity inhabit these waters. The abundance of shellfish out here is enticing. Promises of a fresh seafood chowder is an almost irresistible temptation to paddlers. Don't do it. It's illegal and potentially fatal. In summer, clams, oysters, and mussels of this region of the Pacific are contaminated by a tiny diatom which collects in their muscle tissues, rendering them toxic to humans. Paralytic shellfish poisoning, or red tide, so called after the color of the algae blooms responsible for the condition, can make a human extremely ill or even kill him if taken in sufficient quantities. Some believe that you can take a small portion of a shellfish and rub it against your gums to test it. If nothing happens, it's safe to eat. If your lips begin to tingle and grow numb, it's toxic. But experts caution that PSPs are extremely toxic to humans and warn that if your lips begin to tingle after such a test, it's too late. Better to leave the shellfish alone. Instead, try your hand at fishing or crabbing. Until 1991, visitors who arrived here on the Lady Rose disembarked on a float on Gibraltar Island and usually set up their first camp there to orient themselves and sort their gear. The day before leaving the islands, most paddlers returned to spend their last night on Gibraltar in preparation for departure on the Lady Rose. It comes as no surprise then that Gibraltar was by far the busiest spot in the Broken Group. In peak season, it was difficult to find a few square feet of ground to pitch a tent, and nearly impossible to find even a stick of firewood to build your evening campfire. When the Lady Rose's drop-off point was changed to Seychard, traffic patterns shifted. Now, Hand, Willis, and Turret Islands get the heaviest use. If you've come here in search of silence and solitude, it might be a good idea to set out for a quieter spot as soon as you arrive. And on your last night in the islands, you might want to camp on one of the islands further out. Break camp early and head back to Seychard in plenty of time to catch the Lady Rose when she arrives in mid-afternoon to take trippers back to Port Alberni. Heavy traffic notwithstanding, the islands around Gibraltar are fascinating to explore. There are sea caves around the southwest side of Dempster Island, which should be avoided during cormorant mating season. Of special interest in this cluster is the lagoon between Jacques and Jarvis Island. It is the largest lagoon in the Broken Group. Still and quiet, it is a haven for bird watchers. There are fish traps and middens here, and it's a delightful place to while away an afternoon. Jacques Island was named for Josiah Jacques, who came to Barclay Sound in 1892. Jarvis Island was adapted from Captain Richard's chart of 1861. Effingham Island is the largest in the entire Broken Group. It was originally named Village Island by Captain Barclay, who found a large Indian settlement here. The Hydrographic Service changed its name to Effingham in 1933 for Thomas Howard, the 3rd Earl of Effingham and Deputy Earl Marshal of England. Today, a large Indian reservation is located here. At low water, you can almost walk across the narrow channel between Effingham and Gilbert Island. Gilbert, named by Captain Richards, is a place of special historic significance in the Broken Group. For thousands of years, Indians came here to strip the giant cedars of their bark to weave into baskets, mats, and clothing. When the fog sets on Gilbert just so, and the light from the campfires dances ghostly shadows through the forest, it's easy to imagine that the ancient tribes still inhabit this island. These trees are protected by law. Visitors are asked to respect them. The campsites here afford unobstructed views of Effingham Bay. It was here that Captain Barclay and his bride first anchored in this area. The islands surrounding Effingham and Gilbert are wonderful places to explore. Austin Island is the site of several shipwrecks over the years. It's a favorite destination for Barclay Sound scuba divers. There are sea caves and a tunnel on Dicebox Island. The island was once the site of a large Indian village with more than 200 homes. Wower Island, with its large midden and canoe runs, is home to a large colony of sea lions. These enormous animals have never been known to attack a canoe or kayak, but a fully grown sea lion is bigger than a grizzly bear, with a similarly nasty disposition, and should probably be afforded the same deference. Turret, Tricket, and Lovett Islands form a 4-kilometer-long archipelago stretching to the west. The designated campsite on Turret is laid out on a large midden near the island's western end. The names of all 3 islands were adapted from Captain Richard's chart. These islands are separated by others in the Broken Group by the Thiepval Channel north and east of Turret. The channel bears the name of the ill-fated HMCS Thiepval, a minesweeper which struck an uncharted rock and sank here in the winter of 1927. Willis, Dodd, and Turtle Islands, all named by Captain Richards, are favorite destinations among Broken Group visitors. The three islands define a sheltered natural harbor. A quiet, secluded campsite is situated on the northeast corner of Dodd. The remnants of a garden once hacked from the forest by Salal Joe are still visible beside the campsite. Joe Wildowski immigrated to Canada from an Iranian village near the Russian border after World War II. For more than 20 years, Joe lived alone on a float at Turtle Island. His curious appellation was given him as a result of his modest efforts to commercially harvest salal in the islands for shipment to florists by the Lady Rose. When the park was established, Joe was hired to do casual labor and stayed on to live in the bay. In the summer of 1980, Joe's scow, Hello Nature, was found wrecked on the rocks at Chalk Island, the throttle wide open. His body was never recovered. All that remains of Joe's homestead is the dilapidated fence surrounding his Dodd Island garden and a few timbers where his float once sat in Joe's Bay at Turtle Island. Hand Island is 2 kilometers across Loudon Channel from Lyle Point. It is the first designated campsite encountered by paddlers who travel from Tocourt Bay. Captain Richards named the island in 1861 for First Lieutenant Henry Hand of the survey vessel HMCS Hecate. Southwest of Hand are the Brabant Islands, named for the Reverend A.J. Brabant, a Roman Catholic missionary who served the area by canoe from 1869. Here and there throughout the Broken Group, visitors can catch glimpses of the devastating effects logging companies are having on certain areas of Vancouver Island. Here, as in so many areas throughout the province, the mountains and valleys have been stripped down to their naked flanks. Broken Group visitors can take some comfort in the knowledge that these beautiful islands will remain untouched forever. Every season, thousands of paddlers come from all over the world to explore these precious jewels at the edge of the world. They come to experience one of North America's last remaining wild places, to explore the places where the Nuchalmuth lived for thousands of years, to walk the same beaches the early explorers walked more than 200 years ago, still unchanged, still untouched by technology and dubious progress. And they come to learn to live with the rhythms of wind and sea.